Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into, to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where should we go to first? I'm only going to deal with a couple of topics today. Another Chris O wiki thread talking about mobilized Russians from the Stavropol region. So they're complaining that they've been abandoned here like morons, that's their quote, at a railway station in Western Russia after being made to travel at their own expense and not being paid their salaries. They are now appealing for help. This is such a common occurrence, it appears, that we've heard this for a long time now. It's not like this is particularly recent. There were problems with mobilized troops back in September last year when they did that big mobilization round, and then even previous to that. But Russia seems to be running out of money. They're making mobilized people pay for their own equipment, pay for their own travel in this case. It's just, is this what you would expect from a nation that's on top of their game here, that's winning in this war? No, they're mobilizing because they need people to replace the ones they've lost. And those that they do mobilize, they don't have the money to look after them or the organization to look after them. It's just, not good for the Russians here. In the short video, originally published on private Telegram channel, men can be seen sitting or lying on the ground around a railway station, which an unseen commentator says is at the Kovrov in Vladimir region. He says, quote, "We were abandoned here like morons, and we're here lying here like this. Nobody wants to take us back. They say you're traveling at your own expense, so people are sleeping. I don't know how to deal with this and what to do about it. Our salary was not paid in a lump sum, which should have been from the governor. They didn't give anything from the president. They didn't give anything. Please, if you can, post this video somewhere to get this thing moving." This isn't the first time this kind of incident has occurred, says Chris Owicki, exactly as I was saying earlier. During the early days of mobilization, there were plenty of reports of Mobiks being dumped into empty fields without any food or shelter. And I remember posting that exact video he's embedded there. The men's transportation will likely be resolved fairly quickly, but it highlights the continuing problems in Russia's mobilization system that are still causing difficulties a year after mobilization first began. I mean, you know things aren't right when you're absolutely desperate for mobilization, such that they are doing crypto mobilization, this kind of under the bonnet, under the radar mobilization that people don't particularly know about, and they're mobilizing from abroad in Kazakhstan and other nations around the Caucasus, as well as getting prisoners mobilized, so on and so forth. So you think, right, you're desperate because you're doing this kind of mobilization. You desperately need these people. But then part two is like, well, you've got them, and then you don't seem to care enough about what is going wrong here. So obviously there's a monetary issue. So there's a lack of funds from, in this case, the governor, but also from central government, it seems, as well. And that is a problem. But there's also a lack of cohesion between different elements of the Ministry of Defense, because on the one hand they know they're desperate, right, which is why they're doing this crypto mobilization. So imagine you are in charge of getting these people mobilized and to the front line. Like, your job in the central MOD is to do that, and you put in place these systems such that these guys are being mobilized, but in your entire infrastructure, MOD infrastructure, something's going wrong, such that desperation for mobilization is not being followed through. So there are people that really don't care about how the war is going on the front line. So they're not, fighting hard to get these people to the front line. It's like, no, you need to pay for it. If you're really desperate, then that should include the funding to get that stuff done. So obviously the money isn't there to back up the will and the intention, but even the will and the intention is not there down the military infrastructure, so that when you get to these different elements of the Russian MOD that are more regional out there, people aren't that bothered. And it's a massive hot mess. And this will then translate to a lack of troops on the front line, and also a lack of morale. So when these guys do get there, they think, well, how much does the MOD care about us? How much does Putin care about us? Like, you will probably have elements of some of these people not really wanting to fight anyway and thinking the war's a bad idea. But then you might have elements of that not being the case. But then you wonder, if you really felt strongly about it, why haven't you already signed up? So you're thinking, right, these people are going to be low on morale. And then the communication here is, or the message they're given is that, hey, nobody really cares about us and we have to pay our own way. It's like you feel really devalued. How does that translate to these guys being on the front line? So when they get there, are they more likely to surrender given the first opportunity? Or are they going to be fighting for, Tsar and country, so to speak? So I don't know. It's just none of it is looking good for Russia. Right. Moving on to something different. Justin Bront from the Royal United Services Institute, UK military think tank, says a must-read Jack Watling and Nick Reynolds on the tactical and strategic lessons from the Ukrainian counteroffensive this summer and consequent policy decisions needed now to allow Ukraine to retain the initiative into 2024. So their piece for the RUSI is entitled Stormbreak, Fighting Through Russian Defences in Ukraine's 2023 Offensive. Now, Jack Watling's always worth reading. Nick Reynolds, I guess, too. This is a report that I'm going to share just the kind of synopsis of. As you can see, the whole report is this 7 meg report that looks a lot like this. What is at the beginning here, or what's in this article, which is I've highlighted, and actually I highlighted the whole thing. This is just the executive summary, right? So this is exactly the text that you see here in the executive summary, and obviously it goes into far more detail about the things being talked about here. So what I'm going to do, I haven't had a chance to read the report itself, but I'm going to read you the executive summary, and then I'll go away and do my homework for you. I'll do the work so you guys don't have to, right? That is my position in life. So let's go through this. Russian defenses and military adaptations pose challenges for Ukraine's 2023 offensive, right? Irrespective of the progress made during Ukraine's counteroffensive, subsequent offensives will be necessary to achieve liberation of Ukrainian territory, right? First thing to note here is that this is a very explicit acceptance that they aren't going to, liberate all of the Russian occupied territory in this counteroffensive, and of course that isn't the case. In fact, it's about dialing back expectations so that I think it's going to be about reaching Tokmak and then being able to get fire control over the coastline and the M14 highway that goes parallel to the coast that feeds, Crimea and the south from the east, or vice versa. That I think is going to be what they're going to look to achieve. And even that's going to be, quite difficult given how long it's taking the Ukrainians to move forward. Now, that is obviously an acceptance that they're not going to take Crimea back. In fact, Ben Hodges, who said we'll see the Ukrainians in Crimea by the end of the summer, has said actually that was incorrect, and he was saying that really that's a result of the US government not doing enough, with basically being as supportive as they could have been. So I guess that's going to be in terms of F-16s and ATACMS and whatnot. But I think, again, there was this idea that a counteroffensive would be a lot quicker because they hadn't most people hadn't taken into account the defensive lines. Simple as that. And the longer the Ukrainians took to start the counteroffensive, the more the Russians could dig in. Okay, it's therefore important to assess the tactics employed and training provided during the Ukrainian offensive to inform force generation over the coming months. This report scrutinizes tactical actions to identify challenges that need solving. So the prerequisite condition for any offensive action is fire's dominance. This has been achieved through blinding the counter-battery capability of Russian guns and the availability of precise and long-range artillery systems. Ensuring the sustainability of this advantage by properly resourcing ammunition production and spares for a consolidated artillery peak is critical. Okay, let's dwell on that a little bit, because this has been a success for the Ukrainians. So while they have been struggling to get through the minefields, there's such densely mined fields of Zaporizhia and Donetsk, they have been sitting back not sitting back, but they have been also attriting the Russian artillery. And actually, they realized very quickly that in losing a whole bunch of equipment in the Malatok-Machka counterattack, and they lost those Bradleys and Leopards, and said, right, okay, this isn't going to work. If we keep doing this, we're just going to lose a vast amounts of equipment. We need to demine this area, and we need to do this slowly and quite often by individual infantrymen, or, we need our sappers out there doing that. So we were getting caught in these minefields by artillery. So the minefields would slow us down, and then we'd be absolutely hammered by artillery. So we need to now reassess. We need to take out the artillery whilst having our sappers work on the minefields. And they've done that. And we've got to a position where the Russians are complaining routinely about a lack of counter-battery fire, which goes to this. So this has been achieved through blinding the counter-battery capability of Russian guns. They've done that. Prerequisite condition for any offensive action is fire's dominance. But the key word here is prerequisite. They didn't have that. It is a prerequisite, but you'd normally achieve that by air superiority. They didn't have air superiority, and they were expected to go in and do this counter-offensive, and expected by others, and possibly thought that they could do it themselves. And they found out very quickly that they were completely unable to do that because they didn't have the prerequisite. It has now become a post-requisite, or a new prerequisite, which is to say that we're not doing the counteroffensive. So this whole 3 months of counteroffensive has actually turned back into being the suppression and destruction of enemy air defenses. And it's become an attrition of Russian artillery so that Ukrainians have fire's dominance. And it's almost as if the counteroffensive hasn't really started yet. But that's what happens if you don't have air superiority. NATO wouldn't expect to go and do this without air superiority. So why they were expecting the Ukrainians to do this, or how they were, is beyond me. Ensuring the sustainability of this advantage by properly resourcing ammunition production. So they at the same time, the US and allies have absolutely massively ramped up ammunition production and supply to Ukraine. And Ukraine themselves have got at least some indigenous production as well for long-term sustainability. But this is huge. Like South Korea coming on board and backfilling US stocks. We've got Australia. We've got or even UK eventually with BAE Systems is finally getting onto the ammunition production gravy train. So this is happening, and this is, as I say, critical. Right. To continue, Ukraine is suffering from heavy rates of equipment loss. This is an admission that it is tough for Ukraine. They are losing stuff. But the design of armoured fighting vehicles supplied by its international partners is preventing this from converting into a high number of killed personnel. True. And we hear this a lot from Ukrainians themselves. It is vital that Ukrainian protected mobility fleets can be recovered, repaired and sustained. So we have seen repair facilities in Germany and Poland fixing up, say, Leopard tanks, and we've also seen the willingness of Rheinmetall and BAE Systems and others, I'm sure, to get into Ukraine and set up repair facilities and indeed manufacturing facilities within Ukraine so that the logistics lines aren't so long, it's not too inefficient. You can pull a tank back from the front line and fix it much closer to the front line than taking it all the way back and out of the country and into Eastern Europe. Okay, so this also demands a focus on industrial capacity and fleet consolidation. You are seeing this. So actually there's a really... So it's interesting when you look at little things, like go back to this, and you look at cohesion, and is everything working together? Is there a strategy in place? So NATO have come along, and they've got their doctrine and their strategies, and you've got all the best military minds in the world from the allied nations working together with Ukraine, with the industrial military defense complexes of those nations working together with the Ukrainian industrial military complex to make sure that they're in the best position to achieve all of these stated goals, all these stated aims here, right? That will translate into successful counteroffensives. Now go back to what is Russia doing to achieve its stated intentions and goals. Well, they're not funding their MOD, they're doing crypto mobilization, they're poorly training people, and they're leaving them at train stations. Okay, this isn't talking about ammunition manufacturing, but then what are they doing with that? Well, they're going to North Korea. They are struggling. They're providing poor quality ammunition, shells to the front line that have been sitting and rusting, so on and so forth. Now, am I painting this as all rosy for Ukraine and all terrible for Russia? Yes, I am. But think about that. Take that with a grain of salt. But I think the evidence does suggest that going forward, it goes back to the idea that Russia can't win. They never could win from the beginning. And I don't think they're in a position to win going forward. All they want is for people to stop giving the support to Ukraine, to think in terms of it has to be done by Christmas. And if it's not done by Christmas, we need to go down and do some diplomacy with Putin. And then Putin comes away with Crimea. Okay, so it needs to be a longer vision than that, and it needs to be looking at all the goals and intentions and objectives and say, right, how can we all work together to make sure this is happening? And that is happening. There are long-term commitments to sustainable support for Ukraine on like these 5-year terms, so on and so forth. So I think it's looking good for Ukraine and looking bad for Russia. It just might not happen by spring, right? This is a long-term thing. Okay. Attempts to a rapid breakthrough have resulted in an unsustainable rate of equipment loss. Yes. Deliberately planned tactical actions have seen Ukrainian forces take Russian positions with small numbers of casualties. Okay, so this is the idea that these guys are thinking that the Ukrainians are indeed taking low numbers of casualties when they do take their ground. So yeah, moving into Robotyne, moving into Andriivka and Klishivka, yes, it is slow, but they're doing this in the most efficient way. So they're bite and hold, small chunks, don't lose. So I talked about this before the counteroffensive. I said, right, and I think Mick Ryan, the retired Australian general, was saying, right, there are different ways of measuring success. And success is goal-orientated, right? So what are your metrics of measuring success? Well, it depends what your goals are. And one of the goals is to do whatever they do. So the Ukraine will have different levels of goals, right? Which the primary goal is take back all their territory, right? But all these other goals feed into that. And so you might look at things at the moment and say, well, they're not really intent on taking back territory. No, because that's your overarching goal and they need to achieve other things first before they do that. For example, you're not going to take territory back until you have destroyed the Russian artillery. So it's, okay, sit back. We're not worried about territory at the moment. We're worried about taking out air defense systems. We're worried about taking out logistics lines and trucks and depots. We're worried about taking out artillery. But when we do move forward to take that territory, which is your big goal up here, one of our other goals is, and this is super, super important, is not to lose our own troops. I mean, these are really, really highly valued resources. If we're going to talk about this in like a lack of humanity kind of way, just like these are really high value resources and they can't be replaced very easily. So when we do whatever we do, we need to do it in such a way that we don't lose these resources. And I am talking about humans, and I know that, but go with me. We need to do whatever we do with the intention of not losing as many humans as possible. So therefore, we aren't just going to pile in and just everyone run through these mines and minefields and overwhelm the defenses and take a Pyrrhic victory, because actually we'll then exhaust ourselves and have nothing to go forward. This needs to be sustainable. Whereas the Russians had the other approach so it's really interesting to compare this to what the Russians did throughout their counteroffensive. So let's look at Bakhmut. Their intentions were, they had the overall intentions of territory, but they didn't have a sub goal of not losing as many people. They didn't seem to mind about that. Prigozhin and Wagner were like, we don't really care. They're only convicts. So we'll send them in these human waves. And as long as we get territory, we can then go back to Putin and say, look what we've done. Look what we've achieved. And Putin doesn't care that, 50,000 convicts have died, because that objective wasn't it wasn't an objective, so therefore it wasn't a metric of success. So the Russians could say we have succeeded because a lack of their own troop losses was not an objective and therefore was not a metric. But for the Ukrainians, it is a metric, it is an objective. So whatever they do has to be seen in terms of that. Okay, sorry. Right. However, this approach is slow, with approximately 700 to 1,200 meters of progress every 5 days, allowing Russian forces to reset. So, however, the ramifications of doing this bite and hold, and not attrit Ukrainian forces is that it takes a long time, and they have to use their sappers to demine areas. And all the time it takes, the Russians are able to build more defenses behind the lines, which makes it even slower. It's like a vicious cycle. And that's a problem. So you have, these different kind of objectives which bring about different success metrics, but they have also ramifications that might work against some of those objectives. Like taking territory is going to be even slower to take territory given some of your other sub-objectives. Right. One key limitation on the ability to exploit or maintain momentum is mine reconnaissance in depth. Yeah, the exploration of technological tools for conducting standoff mine reconnaissance would be of considerable benefit to Ukrainian units, and this is something they're looking into at the moment. Another limiting factor in Ukrainian tactical operations is staff capacity at battalion and brigade level. Training of staff would significantly assist Ukrainian forces. This will only be helpful, however, if training is built around the tools and structure that Ukraine employs, rather than teaching NATO methods that are designed for differently configured forces, something we discussed an awful lot recently, and I've given you some opinions. I mean, there was a Kiev Independent article the other day. There was a guy on Ukraine The Latest podcast. There's been consistently people saying the training is provided by NATO is good for these certain types of situations, like someone who's just been mobilized, who's green around the gills and has not done anything like this before. They need that kind of basic NATO training. But someone who's been drawn from the front line and has had 6 months of fighting experience is then taken back to do a NATO training course. This doesn't necessarily work for them. And so it therefore doesn't meet the needs of a lot of the Ukrainian forces. So the question is, how can the NATO trainers adapt their training, get feedback, and adapt it accordingly so it is as useful as it possibly can be? NATO haven't designed their training over minefields with gazillions of mines in stretching hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. As someone fed back, it's like, we asked a NATO trainer, how do we negotiate this minefield? And they said, flank it, go around the side. It's like, yeah, this minefield goes on for 600 kilometers. Like, we can't go around the side. So, there needs to be some kind of adaptation to the training. And this is what RUSI are admitting here. So this is evidently is an issue. I know some people push back on this, but this is an issue. Yes, it's not to say all NATO training is rubbish. It's to say NATO training is really good, but once you've had that NATO training, or once you're an experienced soldier who's been fighting for a long time, okay, where are the needs for that? What are the needs for that kind of training in those troops? This requires regulatory adjustment to allow for the combinations of tools that are highly restricted on many European training areas. So I think I missed a bit. There is also a critical requirement to refine collective training provided to Ukrainian units outside of Ukraine so that Ukrainian units can train in a manner closer to how they fight. That is absolutely key. So finally here, final paragraph of the executive summary. Russian forces have continued to adapt their methods. Some of these adaptations are context specific, such as the increased density of minefields from a doctrinal assumption of 120 meters to a practical aim to make them 500 meters deep. Other adaptations are systemic and will likely have a sustained impact on Russian doctrine and capability development. The foremost of these is the dispersal of electronic warfare systems rather than their concentration on major platforms. A shift to application-based command and control tools that are agnostic of bearer, and a transition to a dependence on more precise fires owing to the recognized inability to achieve the previously doctrinally mandated weight of imprecise fire given the threat to the logistics sustaining Russian guns. Okay. I'll finish that before going back to unpick this. It is vital that Ukraine's partners assist the country's preparations for winter fighting and subsequent campaign seasons now if initiative is to be retained into 2024. So this is about international help for Ukraine. Okay, going back to the Russian issues. So they are saying that the Russians really do need to work a lot on precision guided munitions, essentially. Like, they are relying still on their Russian doctrine of basically flattening everywhere with imprecise doctrinally mandated weight of imprecise fire. Okay, so in other words, there are a bunch of trenches, or there's a town, just flatten it, and that's how we're going to take it. We flatten it, everything's rubble, everyone's dead, and then we walk in and put a flag on top. We put a Soviet flag on top. Job done, thank you very much. That's how we do things. And it's like, actually, okay, you're at a position now that you don't have the ordnance to do that, and then in fact, it is just massively wasteful, and it doesn't quite achieve as precise devastation to the enemy as you would like, and so therefore you need to adapt to that. They also need to adapt in terms of dispersal of electronic warfare systems. I presume they have previously been focusing them in certain places rather than having them, maybe throughout their battalions and whatnot, infused within their battalions in the same way that maybe Orlan drone reconnaissance drones were certainly earlier in the conflict. You had those elements within every single sort of unit type thing. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about what they're talking about here. Those are my guesses. And then it says a shift to application-based command and control tools are agnostic of bearer. Does that mean that perhaps some of the systems they use are very particular, and you have to have particular training on that system? I don't know. But anyway, that is the executive summary, and I can probably get more information on those final points by reading through the main report itself. But I thought that would be a useful summary for you. Hopefully my commentary infused through that makes sense. I am just a random on the internet. Okay, just finally, just drop into this topic, which is the Taurus cruise missile that the Germans are or are not going to provide. The chair of Germany's defense committee slams Chancellor Scholz for not giving long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine, says Tim White. Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann asks, what in God's name is he waiting for? He alone blocks this decision within the coalition. So Scholz is getting a lot of stick here for not providing the Tauruses. The question, well, if you're to be as charitable to him as possible, or to Germany as possible, and bear in mind they are doing an awful lot of other stuff, right? So this makes you think this isn't because Germany are being tight. I don't think so. There'll be other reasons going on here. So what might those other reasons be? Well, Perrin talks about this in his video. I won't play you the segment. This is the latest video, as ever, really, really good. Ukraine air war moves to Russia. Drone attacks F-16s and changing tactics. Now, he has a bit of a section on the Taurus. And he says that basically the Taurus is not compatible with F-16s, and it's not compatible with Su-24s, so the existing bombers that Ukraine uses. And so therefore, you would have to do some serious work to get them adapted to those airframes. The flip side to that is, well, yeah, the same with the Scalp and the Storm Shadow, but they did that. So, give them. And do you know what? Ukraine aren't going to be going, oh, yeah, be a bit of an effort to put them on our planes. Yeah, don't bother. We won't take them. But it'd be like, yeah, no, we'll still have them, and we'll get our mechanics to work on them like 24/7 until they are compatible. So don't you worry about that. Now, it may take some of the functionality away from the missile. So we, as far as I understand it, some of the functionality of the Scalp and the Storm Shadow is degraded because they've been adapted to Su-24. So if they were fired from, say, a Eurofighter Typhoon, then actually they would be much more capable than how they are used from the Su-24s. However, they seem to be doing a pretty good job from the Su-24s. So, yeah. The Taurus would be great. The other issue, he says, is that there are only 600 of them. Like, they don't have a massive amount of Tauruses. But my question is, well, who are you going to use them for? Like I said this with the Challenger 2 tanks, the UK's Challenger 2 tanks. We've got X hundred of them. Okay, a bunch of them are going to get upgraded to Challenger 3, so the turrets are going to get replaced and the chassis tinkered with, but generally kept the same. So we've got another 79 left over from that upgrade. What are we going to do with them? Like, what were these designed for? They're designed to fight the Russians, like the Soviets. Well, give them all to the Ukraine. 79, just give them all to Ukraine. So with the Taurus, like, what are they designed to do? Well, they're designed to bomb stuff in war. Well, okay, what's Germany's biggest threat? Well, Russian Federation at the moment. Well, what are you going to do with them? 600. Yeah, 600 isn't a huge amount, but you know what? I'm fairly sure they're not going to use 600 in the next year. Like, Germany aren't going to use them. So, do you know what? I think they could probably give, I don't know, 300. There you go. There's 300, and if we really want 600 in stock, then we need to build some more. Like would be my approach. Obviously, I'm at the extreme end of be as generous as possible to Ukraine, give them everything they need, right? So I don't have a problem with them giving them 600, or keep a strategic reserve. So 500 Tauruses. There you go, and then start building some. So that's my opinion. Let me know what you think and whether I am correct or not. So my idea would be yes, there are good reasons for not giving them, but still better reasons for giving them. Anyway, that's me done for the extra video. Hopefully that was informative. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for your support. I'm tinkering every video with my audio. Hopefully it's getting, each time it's getting just a little bit better. Just let me know. Keep me updated on what you are experiencing, because what happens is I record them, they sound okay, and then in the process of then going up to YouTube, that will mess around with it. I have like my test audio, and it sounds great, and then I record it and it changes it a little bit, and then I put it up to YouTube and change it a bit more. So feedback is really, really useful. Thank you. Anyway, speak soon.